Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Oregon Environmental Quality Commission meeting. This is the 424th regular meeting of the EQC, and we welcome you all to our agenda today. As we begin, I always like to remember why it is we do this work, and we come together on behalf of the state of Oregon to do work with the Department of Environmental Quality, and it's because DEQ's mission is to be a leader in restoring, maintaining, and enhancing the quality of Oregon's air, land, and water. So as we do our work today, we're going to see what we can do to advance that mission. Please let the record show that all commissioners are present. And Acting Director, Commissioners, you've had an opportunity to review the agenda. Are we aware of any need to amend the agenda at the beginning of our meeting? All right, we don't hear any. We do sometimes need to jockey things around a little bit just as people are available, but we always do try to keep our public forum at the same time in case people are counting on that. So with that, let's dive right in. And our first item today is an informational legislative and budget update. And I'll let everybody introduce themselves as they come on for that agenda item. Welcome.
Great. Good morning, Chair George, Vice Chair Barrasso, and members of the Commission. I am Nancy Bennett. I'm the Interim Deputy Director of DEQ, and I'm here today with my team to share actually just a legislative update. We had hoped to be here to share budget updates, but we don't have the budget yet to share, so we will do that hopefully very soon. But we are here to talk about the legislative session and kind of kick that off. And we have some old and new faces for you. And I don't know if the public can't see our old and new faces, but you can hear about them. So we have Annalisa Bhatia, who is our Senior Legislative Advisor, and Ryan Hoof, our Senior Water Quality Legislative Advisor, Abby Baduris, our Senior Land Quality Legislative Advisor, and then Erin Tieberbaugh, who is a new face for you. She joined DEQ in November as our new Air Quality Legislative Advisor. And I also want to mention that you will be seeing soon Matt Davis, who is going to be stepping in. He's our former Air Quality Legislative Advisor. He'll be stepping in as the new interim policy and external affairs manager. And that is because all of you know that I will be leaving DEQ at the end of January. And just wanted to take a moment just to actually say thank you to you. This will probably be my last EQC meeting. And so at least in this capacity. So just, it's been a real pleasure. I've worked with a lot of you for the whole time I've been at DEQ for 5 years, and some of you newer, but have really enjoyed working with this body. You've accomplished so much, and it's really just been an honor, frankly, to work with you. So thank you very much for that privilege. And sort of without further ado on that, let's move on. No one likes to talk about this topic. So we're going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to talk a bit about the governor's office and just some of the things happening. So as we know, Governor Kotek was inaugurated, sworn in on January 9th. And, today I want to just talk a little bit about her administration and just, a little bit about her office structure, because, we do have a new governor that we haven't had this for a while. So I think it's sort of worth noting just kind of her expectations in relationship to 8 state agencies. And just to quote the governor herself, she talked about her new office structure aims to strengthen partnerships between the governor and agency leaders and increase accountability for improving customer service across state government. And I really do think that that's just such a core goal for here. It's a theme we're hearing a lot. I think Director Feldman would echo that, really that partnership and just a bit of a different tone. But I think it's really a good thing. So just quickly on her office structure, she will, as you can sort of see here, she's going to have sort of an initiatives section, initiatives director, and then really a number of advisors who will be focused on some of her core priorities that she's been talking about. You've probably read about this in the media. Housing and homelessness, behavioral health, and education are really sort of those core areas. And then under another umbrella, there's a deputy for public administration, and there will be key advisors working under this this advisor. And, this is where we'll be working with the natural resources team, public safety, transportation, and other advisors will be under that group. And what I've really seen so far is just, she's really brought on a very experienced team. She's bringing in people from a lot of different backgrounds, and former state legislator, people from local government, education officials. So just like putting together a really great team. And so I think we're really excited to work with these new folks. And some of them we know from other roles. And I think it's going to be really great for the agencies. Stephanie, let's go to the next slide. Maybe, oh, there we go. And I just want to just touch on briefly before, of course, we get into the legislative stuff, again, what Governor Kotek has really talked about with these agency expectations, again, just setting a really different tone. And I think it's relevant for us and relevant for you to hear about. So one is, performance reviews for agency directors. And I think, the governor is going to take a more hands-on role with that. Performance feedback for employees. It's something we already do. We do quarterly check-ins. That will continue. The governor has talked about really wanting to survey employees around satisfaction, and I think understand how state employees are doing out there and maybe where we can make improvements. Supporting strategic planning and measuring agency performance. That's going to be a really key thing that I think she wants to see some consistency across state agencies. So I think we'll be hearing, we're obviously have been engaged in strategic planning. And so I think we'll be talking more about how we'll fit into sort of the governor's plans there. Managing information technology progress. I think that's one area that DEQ has really strong leadership, and we have an IT strategic plan, and I think we're really ahead of the game in that area. Governor has strong commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then this isn't new, but I think it's interesting that the governor has called this out, which is emergency preparedness, and really an expectation that agencies have in place their continuity of operations plans, and that will be a focus. So those are just some of the things that we're hearing about, and we're really excited, I think, to be working with the new administration, and we'll see how that goes. But now I'm going to turn it over to Annalisa to talk about legislative issues. So next slide, please.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Chair George, Vice Chair Barrasso, members of the commission. My name is Annalisa Spatia, for the record, Senior Legislative Advisor. Can everyone hear me okay with the mask? Okay, let me know. It's so hard to gauge volume control here. So as a reminder, how DEQ typically participates in a legislative session revolves a lot around making sure that those legislators that are making informed decisions and they have all the information they need about our current programs, about what they propose, how they would impact the agency. And that looks like individual meetings, it looks like informational sessions, it looks like answering questions about bills and kind of whatever is needed in the Capitol. And I would say as we enter this session, as you've already heard a little bit, the themes that we are really hearing are transition and change and a little sprinkle of uncertainty. We have entered into kind of a new era for the Oregon legislature, and it's not just because of the governor transition, though obviously that plays a large role, but we are also seeing major leadership changes. In the House side, of course, there is House Speaker Rayfield, Republican leader Vicky Freese-Iverson, and while they have been around for one short session, this is their first long session in those roles. Same on the Senate side, of course, former Senate President Courtney was there for quite some time in that role. Now we have Senate President Wagner, who is taking over that office, and all of this will mean figuring out their own flow, their own process, their own style. We have new caucus members in different positions of leadership, and so it'll just be interesting to see how that impacts the overall flow of bills. And I would be remiss too if I didn't acknowledge the fact that there is a very large percentage of all of the respective caucuses that are either entirely new or have never participated in a long session in person. And it's a little over 40%, depending on how at what point you count. And so it'll be really interesting to see how that impacts how ideas move, how ideas flow, and how amendments get developed. Even just this week, we have had a very successful past couple of sessions as they've been participating remotely, but already, and I think I can speak for the analysts too who have been in the building, we are back in it when I am just walking down the hallway, and I might think I'm just walking down the hallway, and then I have 3 back-to-back meetings unexpectedly because I run into someone and we get to talk about something, and We get to answer questions and that sort of thing. So it'll be just really interesting to see how getting back into the in-person swing of things impacts the legislature. I will say too, an added nuance to all of this is that the Capitol, as you probably know, is under construction. So areas of the rotunda, areas where we normally would have access by the public are not accessible right now. So if you can picture the Capitol building, it's that long hallway and it's the specific offices themselves. We are down some of the committee rooms. We're down some of the areas where normally you can post up to have those in-hallway meetings. And it's going to impact how things work. We have fewer committee rooms, which is going to result in shorter meetings. So a committee meeting is only going to be an hour and a half, where before we would have over 2 hours per meeting. And that is resulting in fewer committees. So just for an example, last long session on the House side, there were 21 committees with 2 subcommittees, and now we have 14 committees. So it's going to be just as many, if not more bills in a shorter amount of time. And that's going to result in fewer informational sessions. It's going to result in more, figuring things out inside meetings and then bringing things to the committee that may or may not be already baked. And it'll just, again, impact the flow.
And perhaps most importantly, the cafe is closed.
That
That more than
That's big.
anything may limit.
We have had multiple strategic meetings trying to figure out that.
Right.
Bring a water bottle too. That is an issue. I do hear there's going to be more coat racks brought in, which is
Excellent.
pretty key right now. So one piece that I would mention is this plays out in a couple of ways, impacting DEQ areas. First, there will not be a separate committee on climate as there has been in the past.
Mm.
There's also not a separate committee on water, which there has been in the past. And so as we're getting into these areas where we expect to have many robust discussions and where there are a large number of, especially water bills, not having a specific committee will be very interesting to see how some of those bills get prioritized. Overall, in a long session, typically we see a little over 3,000 bills. And typically that is also a little over 200 bills from agencies. So far in the first drop, we have seen just under 2,000 bills. So that actually puts us in line closer to 4,000 if everything else kind of holds true. So it will be very interesting again to see how this prioritization happens. The one piece I would also mention is that as the new governor has been coming on, typically, as you know, we would have our governor's request budget come out in early December. And along with that, we would be given our final approval for what legislative concepts can move forward. At this point, DEQ has not received approval for any of our legislative concepts. And that is consistent with most other agencies. Like I say, in a long session, typically there's over 200 bills from agencies. So far, it's just a little over 50 that have been approved. And there are multiple reasons for that. First, Governor Brown, as she was going out, didn't want to make any major budgetary decisions that would then tie Governor Kotek's hands when those bills were dropped and they had budget implications. Same with large policy proposals. So what we saw get approved tends to be the bills that have technical changes. They tended to be the kind of minor cleanup bills. And the rest of the bills haven't been outright rejected, but essentially we are in the waiting game for Governor Kotek as her team comes on. They need time to review all of these different proposals. And as she is putting together her governor's request budget, those proposals that she approves and works into those budgets will get approval to move forward. So while normally we would be able to say, yes, these are the bills we're taking forward, what I think we're going to do today is remind you of what legislative concepts are out there. And we will let you know once we receive final word on what we will be able to work or not. That governor's request budget, we do expect it must be released by February 1st. So in the next week and a half, we expect to have more information. And until then, of course, DEQ does not take a position on bills. So we are answering questions. We're meeting with new legislators, letting them know about the agency and answering any questions they have. And just as a final fun fact before turning it over to my colleagues, I would share that of all of those bills that got dropped in that first go round, 442 have the word study in them. And another 29 have the words task force. So there are a lot of placeholders. We expect a lot of changes as just for an amendment come out, and it should be a fun session.
Thanks, Annalisa.
By fun, you don't really mean fun.
Every day we can talk about DEQ is fun.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Chair, members of the commission. My name is Erin Tiberba. I'm the new legislative and policy analyst for air quality and greenhouse gas issues. It's very nice to meet you. The couple of bills from the department that I'm particularly keeping an eye on would be the Title V stabilization bill. The Title V program is requesting an authorization to increase fee revenue over 2 years, so a biennium. It's a tiered structure that we've proposed. And so there would be a fee increase for 23, 24, and then the final phase would be leaving fee increases up to the commission within certain parameters. You might know that the Title V program hasn't increased fees in about 13 years. And so this particular legislative concept would allow us to continue current staffing, restoring 11 positions that we would otherwise lose without the bill. Currently, the fees are set in statute. The format was established in 1991. And there's a base fee that is paid equally amongst all Title V. There is the emissions fee based on annual emissions from each source. And then there's fees for modifications and other special activities. As the federal regulations have continued to evolve, the program has gotten more and more complex to administer. The Title V sources are also the ones that are implicated with regard to air toxics and regional haze. And so this is a particularly important legislative concept that I'm kind of holding my breath for. The other one.
Just a moment, Director.
Not
Feldman.
to interrupt you, but if I can just add to that a little bit, that was a great explanation, Erin, thanks. And just for the commissioners who you see all the different fees for our different programs come at you. So for a little context, you often see the request for an increase in water quality fees, which you are allowed to do up to 3% on an annual basis. We don't have that kind of mechanism with Title V. It's only in statute. So what part of this bill is seeking to do is to routinize those increases a bit more to provide a little more stability for the fee payers so that it's more gradual and predictable, smaller increases versus this, every 7, 10, 13 year, whatever it may be, unpredictable, large increase. So that's kind of what we're aiming for here.
Vice Chair Barrasso.
And how does this relate to ACDP permit fee increases? I think we have seen those recently.
Yes, this does not relate to those. They're separate categories. The ACDP program can be paid for with a mixture of fee funds and general fund. The Title V program must be paid for with only fees.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank
just wanted to add that. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you for that. The second concept that I've been keeping an eye on is the climate community investments. And the climate community investments are part of the climate protection program. It's one of the compliance mechanisms that is out there for regulated fuel suppliers. And in order to obtain more compliance credits or more available emissions release, they would be able to send funds to a limited number of community climate investment projects that would then meant to offset the emissions that they would be able to access. As part of the compliance obligation with regard to the community climate investments, they've got to be 501c3 nonprofits, demonstrate appropriate administrative processes, financial controls, and so forth. The CCP program is currently open for requests for information that will close later this month. And that will kind of give a universe of what types of community climate investment projects would be out there, would be available. The division with, department with the community climate investment legislative concept is seeking 4 positions for administration and oversight of those projects. So it would request authorization to charge a 5% administrative fee from the community climate investment providers that would be based on the amount that they're receiving from the fuel suppliers as part of the offsets. So I don't know if there's any questions about that one.
Commissioner Slusher.
Thank you. I was just wondering if you could give me the LC number for that bill or
Sure.
for that concept.
Through the chair, the LC is 410.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And then with other bills of interest that we're just kind of seeing come out there, there's EV rebate funding. So it proposes currently $30 million for the 23-25 biennium for the electric vehicle rebate program that's been very, very popular. That would be on top of the $14 million that we're expecting from the privilege tax. So that would continue that program a little bit longer. And then rebates being popular and effective, we've also seen other rebates. There's a bill that would propose a rebate for electric bikes, for farm equipment, and for medium and heavy duty vehicles. There's also a couple bills out there for alternative fuels, biodiesel in particular, and I have both a study bill and a task force bill. So we'll be watching those closely. There's some interest in small non-road engines. I know that this has been a recurring theme for the department. There's one that proposes a tax credit for electric leaf blowers. And then there's a couple bills that would require the establishment of emission standards and then providing incentives for the small non-road engines are defined as anything 25 horsepower or less. And then there's one bill that is addressing indirect sources. Right now, it's just directing the development of an indirect source program. There's not a whole lot of details to the bill, but we'll be keeping an eye on that one as well. Are there any questions?
Thank you. And it doesn't look like we have any for you right now.
Thank you.
Well, great. Good morning, Chair George, members of the commission. I'm Abby Beduris, legislative analyst for the Land Quality Division. It's good to see you all in person again and to provide some updates on bills of particular interest to the division. But I do want to add to Annalise's fascinating list. I saw today we have one bill relating to kangaroos. So,
Okay.
one I've never seen before. Something about trading the meat, I think.
Kangaroo trading?
Yeah, so if you.
It's about time.
We'll see if there's more. But I'll keep them posted. But I will start with the 2 bills that DEQ did request through the governor, and we mentioned to you last summer when we last met. And I just feel obliged to say, we are still waiting from the governor's office. So these are just the ones that we put forward. First is an update to the Oregon Electronics Recycling Program, or Oregon eCycles. It's one of several extended producer responsibility programs in Oregon that DEQ oversees. You've heard me talk about these, I think, in the past. They include paint, drug take back, and then the recently passed laws on mattresses and printed paper packaging and food serviceware. So eCycles, actually one of our oldest, it's 14 years old now. Some people count the bottle bill. I'm not including that. So this is our one that we oversee. And it requires electronic manufacturers to provide free, convenient, responsible recycling for computers, TV, monitors, printers, and peripherals. If they sell these products into Oregon, they have to join a producer responsibility organization, or PRO. Those PROs establish convenient service around the state, and they have to accept all the covered electronic devices that I mentioned. They pay for transportation and they contract for responsible recycling. It's been successful. We've had, many incredible increase to convenience and the amount of material, the millions of pounds that's been collected. But everyone involved over the years of implementation and it being our first one, we've learned a lot since it passed. And then in late 21 and 2022, there were some concerns about the loss of some collection sites and instability in the collection system, and it garnered some legislative attention. So in response to that, DEQ engaged national, state, local stakeholders, both people who are collectors, processors, manufacturers, and we've had a series of big stakeholder meetings. We've had 4 large group stakeholder meetings with one scheduled for tomorrow and many small conversations as well. That's led up to a draft legislative concept that we have now. We're looking to kind of achieve 3 things: to reduce administrative burden, both for the organizations that are responsible for implementing as well as for DEQ, sort of a little smaller government version of the program, to create a more robust and stable collection infrastructure. That's kind of what instigated this attention, and expand the scope of covered materials. So we'll see where we go on that, but there's a lot of interest. And we are anticipating kind of going with an agreed upon bill from all of the stakeholders. I guess that's always our goal, but I'm feeling hopeful there. The other bill I spoke to you all about is related to a program that's really reached the end of its useful life. That's the Oregon Dry Cleaner Program. It was created by the Oregon legislature in 1995 to create a cleanup fund paid for by the dry cleaning industry that would then otherwise exempt dry cleaning owners and operators from cleanup liability and ensure cleanup of contamination resulting from those facilities. At the time that the law was passed, we had about 500 dry cleaning facilities, when we expected a revenue of about $1 million a year. We actually never achieved that target. And as of the last, I just looked up some numbers the other day, we're under 150 dry cleaners in Oregon. I don't know about you, but, less dry cleaners, certainly over the last few years, but it's been an industry in decline. Revenues going down pretty solidly, 7 to 10% a year. So the program is no longer financially viable. The fees don't cover program administration. They don't provide sufficient revenue for future cleanups. We worked with stakeholders in the past to try to find a way to increase revenue through fees, and that has just not been successful. So we put forward a legislative concept that would really do 3 things. The first, it would sunset the program. So just kind of erase it from statute. It would secondly prohibit the use of perchloroethylene and N-propyl bromine in dry cleaning operations. Those are the 2 real most toxic, perchloroethylene being the primary one. So let's kind of get us out of having this problem in the future. It would create a reimbursement fund to help the existing dry cleaners who are still using perchloroethylene, less than 40 is my last look, to help them transition to either water-based or less toxic operations. Many of these they're almost all small businesses and many are minority owned. So looking for a way to help smooth that transition. So if I just quickly move on to the bills kind of interest, but aren't being moved forward. Sorry, lost my place. Of the 2,000 or so that Annalisa mentioned, there's about 40 that are really of particular interest to land quality, although I do expect to see quite a few more. As is typical, many of those are relevant to the materials management program. And there's first sort of a whole series of them about reducing waste. The first is a right to repair bill that's returning. It's been around for a number. I think this is either the 3rd or the 4th session we've seen it, which requires the manufacturers of consumer electronics to make available to the owner of that equipment or independent repair provider documentations and tools to enable people to fix their own equipment. It would reduce the amount of electronic waste and save money. I believe it has recently passed in New York, being, I think, the first state to pass that.
Commissioner Addington.
Thanks. Abby, is that just limited to electronics, that right to repair?
That's my consumer electronics, as I understand. It was once much more broad, and they've narrowed it down over time.
Okay, thank you.
Another bill, kind of another repeat bill, is a styrofoam ban phasing out styrofoam in to-go containers, and I think a couple other uses, as well as it bans the use of PFAS chemicals in food packaging. I think we've seen this one 3 times before as well. Next is a bill, a new one that would require 25% reduction of single-use packaging over the next 10 years. That's something that has passed in California. And that would have a commission rulemaking role. So we're keeping a very close eye on what that would look like and how we could do that, the measuring of that. And then one that would update Oregon law to allow for reusable containers to be used in the bulk section of supermarkets. It's something that may well be fixed by rule before this bill comes up, which is, I think, what everyone is hoping for. There is an administrative fix there, not a DEQ fix, but it does, it's related to a lot of our reduce, reuse, recycle component. Then there's a couple bills related to claims of recyclability in products. One which is based on the outcome of the Truth in Labeling Task Force that DEQ was required to run last spring. Another is a study bill. So we'll see, I think there'll be some activity there. And then not released yet is a whole package of bills on resilient buildings that came out of the rebuilding task force. That really is going to be looking at the relationship of our buildings to greenhouse gas emissions. So it'll be everything kind of from energy efficiency, possibly to building materials, but none of those are out. So I don't have any details, but we do expect to see a number of them. And then leaving materials management, we have several bills out around abandoned derelict vessels. Those are everything from your pleasure craft to large former military vessels that literally litter our rivers and coastline. So a lot of interest in looking at whether it's a study bill or funding, or we're not, once again, not exactly sure yet how this will play out to address that issue. And that would be the Marine Board, DSL, DEQ, or the 3 kind of primary agencies that are involved there. So I will pass it back to Ryan here.
Good morning, Chair George, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Ryan Huff. I'm the Senior Policy Analyst for Water Quality Programs here at DEQ. Our water quality program has prepared 4 legislative concepts for this session. The caveat remains, as everyone else said, all of which remain, and we're awaiting word from the governor's office on whether or not those move forward or not. 2 of these are related to groundwater protection specifically. The first would require DEQ to solicit a third-party contractor to conduct an evaluation of the effectiveness and the adequacy of the state's Groundwater Quality Act. And to establish a task force to be convened to review the results of that evaluation and potentially make some recommendations. Since passage of the act over 30 years ago, the state agency resources to implement program efforts have declined. And there's never really been a comprehensive evaluation or look at how well this program is working and whether or not there could be some changes that could be made to improve the state's multi-agency approach towards restoring areas that are affected by groundwater contamination.
And
Yes.
so it's interesting to think about that. Recently, an opportunity to go to a 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act environmental law seminar. And one of the things that we were reflecting on talking about is when a lot of these acts whether this or Kumar, were initially adopted, right? The people who were setting them up had specific problems in mind that they were trying to address, right? And so, we want that river not to catch on fire. We want people's wells to be able to be clean. And yet over time and work and science, we've come to some conclusions that, groundwater and surface water, and pretending that they aren't the same thing, right? And they don't directly and indirectly impact each other. Are these sorts of reviews an opportunity to look at how our regulations sometimes impose separations that can't really be scientifically justified? Is there any opportunity to address some of those challenges as these kind of reviews take place?
Sure, George, thanks for the question. I think those are excellent points. And we've approached this concept really to set the table for folks to bring various issues of concern to the forefront and to have an open conversation amongst the different agencies that are involved, amongst the variety of interested parties, to put on the table what's working and what's not, so that we can look at potential recommendations either for the legislature to consider for statutory changes to how the act is implemented, and or executive branch policies that could improve the way that we respond. So
Thanks. It sounds like it's an open table.
Indeed. I do want to point out that this is intended to work as a statewide approach. And there's lots of specific discussions within specific WAMAs and specific areas of the state. And that work is expected to continue and at an urgent level where needed to continue. And this work is not intended to delay any of those activities. I just want to make that point clear. The second concept related to groundwater work aims to improve reporting efficiency and efficacy regarding data that's submitted from domestic well testing associated with real estate transaction requirements around the state. Recent data indicates that less than 10% of these samples and these results that are required are actually making it to the state's public health and environmental agencies as required under law. This data would be valuable for determining where we could focus our limited resources for more robust groundwater monitoring and evaluation efforts. And rather than relying on the property seller to submit the data to OHA as is currently required in the statute, we've proposed that private laboratories who perform the testing already to submit those reports electronically and that data electronically to DEQ's lab so that we can manage that data and share it appropriately with other entities and use that effectively. Our third legislative concept proposes a slight expansion of the entities eligible to apply for and receive loan funding as part of our Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Oregon statutes governing this eligibility currently exclude some entities, such as public domestic water supply districts, from being able to access the loan fund for otherwise eligible projects. Expanding this eligibility, we feel, would provide some small communities around the state with additional financing options to be able to purchase environmentally sensitive or valuable lands that are part of their watershed, that are part of their drinking water source area. Fourth, we've proposed a concept that would provide you, our Environmental Quality Commission, with the authority to adjust fees for a broader range of water quality fee types than you are currently authorized to do so for. Currently, as was mentioned earlier, you have the authority to adjust wastewater permitting fees up to 3% per year. This is just for our federally issued NPDES permits and our state WPCF and WPCF on-site fee types. However, a comparable authority does not exist for a small subset of other water quality fee categories, such as those that support our work around our on-site direct service work, our 401 dredge and fill water quality certification efforts, our UIC rule authorizations, as well as our wastewater operator certifications. So this would establish consistency across our fee-funded programs in water quality in terms of how the increases are evaluated and considered, and would aim to replace those infrequent large increases in fees with more periodic small increases, something that we often hear requested from the fee-paying community and was already mentioned by Interim Director Felden. So we're eager to work with Governor Kotek's staff and with the legislature to further explore these concepts as the session moves forward. Besides these bills of critical interest to the agency, and as Annalisa mentioned, there's certainly a lot of interest around water, it appears, heading into this session. There's numerous committee bills from the House Agriculture, Land Use, Natural Resources, and Water Committee that have either already been introduced or expected to be introduced in the coming days or weeks. And a number of legislator bills that either have direct or indirect implications for our programs. Water reuse or recycled water seems to be one of those topic areas of interest with strong bipartisan interest. DEQ has somewhat of a dual interest or role regarding water reuse. On one hand, we have an interest, and one might even say there's an expectation that we promote and encourage beneficial reuse of water, both domestic and industrial wastewater, as well as residential gray water. Simultaneously, our primary responsibility is to regulate and establish permit conditions on this reuse of recycled wastewater in a manner that ensures safety of public health and protection of the environment. Further development and maturation of this program with limited dedicated staffing has been challenging. And so that's been a topic of discussion amongst various interested parties. There is one study bill that's been introduced already. We're also aware of another bill that's anticipated that would provide direction to the agency to develop outreach and technical assistance resources to expand reuse work in the state and potentially to develop policy recommendations as well that could further support this type of work. Next, to address emerging concerns over toxicity of per and polyfluoroalkyl alkyl substances or PFAS. We're aware of at least one bill that would direct Oregon State University's Extension and College of Agricultural Sciences in collaboration with DEQ and municipal wastewater providers to study the fate and transport of PFAS found specifically in biosolids that are applied to agricultural lands. Another committee bill, which we believe would be complementary to the SRF eligibility concept that the agency is putting forth that I just talked about, would establish a new community drinking water enhancement protection fund. This new program would be administered by OHA in collaboration and consultation with OWEB, DEQ, Forestry, and Business Oregon. And the aim is to provide funds and grant opportunities to small community water suppliers to assist with financing the voluntary purchase of lands that would protect, restore, or enhance community drinking water source areas. And then last but not least, water planning and coordination challenges have been a key theme amongst multiple forums that have been active this biennia, including the Regional Water Planning Group, the Tribal Water Task Force, the Oregon Water Futures and Water Justice Framework Group. In addition, the Secretary of State Audits Division was asked to conduct an evaluation of water coordination and governance in the state, and their report is anticipated here in the next couple of weeks. By all indications, these various efforts have contributed to the development of numerous bill concepts that we're expected to be talking about and engaged with in the coming months. These include things like changes to how the integrated water resource strategy is developed and revised, a bill to make place-based planning initiatives permanent that otherwise are set to sunset, as well as new initiatives to strengthen water leadership out of the governor's office and establish a statewide strategic water planning council. Many of these concepts are still in early stages of development, but are likely to generate a lot of interest and discussion. So that is just scratching the surface of many water bills, but hopefully gives you a flavor of some of the discussions that we expect to be involved in. So I don't think we have any specific closing remarks from our team, but with that, I think any of us would be happy to take any questions or comments that you have about this work. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Really appreciate the overview. Any questions or comments? Any overview for this time?
It's
Vice
just,
Chair Barrasso?
thank you, Chair George. Is this just at a high level? Is this big? Is this? I mean, it's been a while since we've had a long session in person, and is this just this level of? It seems like there's quite a bit going on, and part of me is maybe my recall has just gotten that much hazier. But is this normal for a long session or a long session in person? Is this level of activity? Because it seems like it'll be a very busy session.
Chair George, Vice Chair Barrasso, indeed, there is a lot going on, but I think that every long session There seems to be an abundance of bills, abundance of topics that are introduced. Of course, some of those may not gather traction and move, whereas we expect a lot of them to be of interest to folks and have hearings and potentially requests on fiscal impact statements from the agency. So definitely a lot of wheels turning. Exciting time for our team for sure.
I love the term exciting, right? I like the enthusiasm. I mean, this team just can't wait to get in there and then have capital and talk to people. about this stuff.
That's why they're the great team they are.
That's right. All right. Any other questions or comments so far? No. Well, Nancy, I sincerely hope you didn't think you were going to get out of here without a little bit more being said about your leaving our team. Yeah, why don't you just sit
Take a seat.
the hot
It's like, it feels like a roast started here.
Well, maybe.
Like I need a hat or
unfortunately, We don't have
something,
time on the agenda for the roast, but maybe if we add that to the end. I think we absolutely have to thank you for the role that you've played here. I think it should be coming up, not quite 5 years that you've been at DEQ, but what a 5 years, right? I think working with the former director, Richard Whitman, and with Leah Felden, you really helped recreate and really create to a large degree the team we see today, not only stepping up as our interim deputy director, but really helping DEQ really focus on and improve the political and external affairs department, our communications, our legislative affairs. I can tell you that very personally, I've appreciated I appreciate your way of kind of cutting through 4,000 bills or whatever it will end up being, and helping us in the department focus on the meat, on the kernel, on what's really going to move, what's really going to go, what could really affect where DEQ is trying to go. And I think this team, the team that you've built and developed, has deserved tremendous credit for DEQ getting back the positions it needs to fulfill that mission. We remember at the beginning of every meeting. An emaciated Department of Environmental Quality is going to have problems like permit backlogs and other problems. And it's really you guys, the team that you've built and the relationships you've built that has helped DEQ come out of that place. Again, we know we still have ways to go, but to be in a very different place where this is a department that's doing the work it needs to do, that's focusing on its priorities and isn't so underfunded that it can't do that. So I want to thank you. And Grandma, where we come from, we say I raise my hands to you to honor someone for their commitment and for what they've really brought forward for the people, and you truly deserve that. Anybody else interested in embarrassing Nancy before we move on to the agenda item?
Well, I would just say, I appreciate you too, Nancy, and I appreciate when I first came on the commission the first time, just really deer in the headlights, not knowing and ushering me around places in the Capitol and then at least to go see people and make for a smooth onboarding. So I really do appreciate it. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
I'll just say, Nancy, I know we worked together prior at the county, and I know when you were talking about coming to DEQ, I was incredibly excited, and it's been excited right through the entirety of the time. I mean, I think all the pieces Kathleen have said have been incredibly true, and you've been central to really shaping this agency and the path that it's moving forward on. And there's so much work here, and so much of that being in good stead is in no small part to you. So just want to thank you and congratulate you on your journey ahead.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to echo the thanks. And as Commissioner Addington noted, I mean, you were such an incredible help guiding me through the process of joining the commission. So from a personal standpoint, I want to thank you. You are going to leave a huge gap. We are going to miss you. I know you're not going far, but yeah, you're leaving some big shoes to fill at the agency, but I'm excited for you. And I hope to continue to have opportunities to work with you.
You will. I'll keep it brief and just say thank you. You've done more to explain civic governance to me than any class I've ever taken. And I just really appreciate your style with this. You just kind of cut to the chase, make it easy to digest. And I know underneath it all, there are so many layers that you just navigate beautifully. and you've created an incredible team. So it is a joy to always get these legislative updates, and I look forward to them in the future. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you.
George, if I just may briefly, all the
Absolutely.
commissioners have said it so well, and so there's not a lot to say here, but just to really express my sincere gratitude to Nancy. Nancy's been just really a right hand to me for a long time, not just in the last few months as interim deputy, but for a long time. And we've worked really well together, and we've had a lot of fun. And it was no happenstance that she was the one that I wanted to serve in the interim deputy role in these last few months. And she was the absolute right choice. And I appreciate all of her help during this time and helping us get to the point of transition into new leadership at the governor's office and here at DEQ. So thank you, Nancy. I will miss you, and I'm so glad that you will still just be a phone call away.
That's great. Well, and I just thank you for those kind words, very much appreciated. And I really do feel like it's the team, as Annalisa likes to say, teamwork makes the dream work. And it really is the team. I mean, I feel like I can't do any of this without these guys. And I'm really excited about Matt Davis being willing to come back and step into these shoes. And I'm very confident that everything is going to go really smoothly. It's going to be fine. And I will be calling you probably because I'll need some help. But anyway, I just really appreciate it. It's been a great 5 years. And honestly, I didn't think I would survive when I first. It's like, I don't know if I'm going to fit in here, but I'm glad I found a way and you found a way to put up with me. So thank you.
Yeah, well, and I think it's also your rendition of I'm Just a Bill that has really inspired a lot of us to stick with this. So thank you for that as well. Okay, we'll stop.
Thanks,
embarrassing you
Nancy.
now. Thank you so much, Nancy, for everything you've done. All right, and it is time for our first action item of the day, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Loan Program Rules. So welcome, Jennifer and team. Just for the folks who can't see all this, we're in kind of cozy quarters. So we have to provide a little transition time for one team to filter out and the next to filter in. So we're just about ready now. Welcome.
Thank you. All right, looks like we're ready to go.
I think so.
Okay, wonderful. Well, good morning, Chair George and members of the commission. My name is Jennifer Weigel and I'm the Water Quality Administrator here at DEQ. And with me, I have two other folks. One over here, and I think off camera is Martina Fry. She is our interim manager of the Community and Program Assistance, which has the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Loan Program in it. Lynn Barlow, our previous manager, departed DEQ late last year. And so Martina's stepping in that role while we recruit for a new manager. And I also have Chris Marco here with me today. He's going to be leading us through our presentation today. He's the program coordinator for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Program. So we're really excited to be here today to talk to you about these rule revisions. Chris is going to cover some of the background and the why around this rulemaking. And also how this rule interfaces and these rule revisions interface with other important aspects of how we both develop the program and how we make loans and how we decide how to fund people and develop that pipeline of funding projects. And then, of course, specifically the meat of what we're here to do today, which is to talk about the substance of the rule revisions and the process that we use to come at those revisions that are in front of you today for action. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chris.
Good morning, Chair George, Vice Chair Barrasso, Commissioner Kyle, Commissioner Addington, Commissioner Schlisser. My name is Chris Marco. I'm the program coordinator for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program here at Oregon DEQ. It's a real pleasure to be here today. What I'm going to share with you is the culmination of over a year's work since passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law back in November of 2021. I came before you in July for an information item and provided an update about our approach with the rulemaking with the bipartisan infrastructure law context. And I'm going to revisit some of that and then go into the scope of the rulemaking, what we've been doing, and ultimately looking ahead and our recommendation for proposed rule changes today. So as mentioned, in November 2021, Congress passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also technically known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We refer to it as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, as EPA does, the BIL, the bill. You'll hear me refer to it in those ways today. That is the largest single investment that the federal government has made in water infrastructure funding. So it's an exciting time to be involved in water infrastructure funding, which includes wastewater in the terminology. And we've been working really diligently, as I mentioned, for over a year now to ramp up on bill implementation. And one of the requirements in the bipartisan infrastructure law is to provide more principal forgiveness overall for the program for borrowers. And that triggered this rulemaking because we have limits in rule that are lower than we think we need to have on a per loan basis in order to meet that requirement for the program overall. And I'll talk more about that. So that's a key priority of the rulemaking in context of the bill. There's also priorities that EPA laid out in the bipartisan infrastructure law. There was a guidance memo issued in March of this year, or last year, I should say, 2022. Happy New Year. And so there are a lot of priorities as well that EPA is encouraging state revolving fund programs to address. And those include further addressing needs of disadvantaged communities, which mean communities that meet affordability criteria for clean water state revolving fund programs. The bill funding is also going to the drinking water SRF, and we're coordinating with them. There's a priority on environmental justice, and I'm going to talk more about how we're addressing that in the bill implementation, not specifically part of the rulemaking, but related. There's also a priority to address emerging contaminants, and there's specific funding that's dedicated for clean water state revolving fund programs and drinking water state revolving fund programs to further address emerging contaminants. We'll talk about that. There's also a new requirement, Build America, Buy America, that's similar to American Iron and Steel. It's in addition to that. That's something not specifically related to the rule, but part of the bill implementation that we've been ramping up on, and how we will provide guidance to borrowers and our staff, and providing assistance on that, which leads to the next priority, technical assistance. That is new under the Clean Water Act, that Clean Water State Revolving Fund programs can access part of our federal capitalization grant money to provide technical assistance, which is great. And so those are the key priorities of the bill that we're focused on for our program. In terms of the funding, through the bipartisan infrastructure law, and a little more context of the funding that we receive. We receive an annual base cap grant that we've been receiving for many years. We apply to EPA. There's an allocation, there's an allotment that's helped our program in our 30+ years of existence. You know, when we started, we got federal money. We've lent that money out for a time. It's come back, and we've been able to revolve the fund, hence the term revolving loan fund. So we could be self-sustaining as a state program in that way. And we do also rely on the federal money to infuse the program as a source. So the base cap grant funding for federal fiscal year 2022, which we've applied for and has been awarded, is $13,071,000. So looking ahead, there's this new bill supplemental cap grant that has been allocated in the amount of $20,271,000 for our program. We need to apply for that funding. We're looking to apply for it after this rulemaking. We have things in place targeting April. In addition, as I mentioned, there's funding for emerging contaminants, and there's a specific capitalization grant available to our program to access to specifically address projects that focus on emerging contaminants. That amount is $1,064,000, and that amount has been allocated as well. We anticipate applying for that sometime during the year. We're in the process of determining needs. As I mentioned, there's a requirement for the Bill Cap grant to provide more principal
I
forgiveness.
apologize.
Might be a
Just
question.
one moment, Commissioner Slusher.
Thank you, Chair George. I was just wondering, for the emerging contaminants, is that a defined term, or are there specific contaminants that are listed?
There's a definition for emerging contaminants based on the EPA guidance. PFAS is one of the top priorities. I should say the drinking water program is also looking at this. They received substantially more funding, partly because PFAS more specifically relates to drinking water. We've convened an internal group on that within water quality to identify the eligibilities. Forever chemicals, pesticides, personal care products, and EPA again has detailed guidance in terms of definitions, and I'd be happy to follow up and provide any more information on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So 49% of the bill supplemental cap grant is required to be provided as additional subsidization or principal forgiveness for our program. So that 20 million plus amount, we're going to have to provide about $10 million of that as principal forgiveness. We're also required to provide a certain percentage of our base cap grant as principal forgiveness. So we're going to be providing a lot more principal forgiveness for communities, which is a great thing. So in order to do that, as I mentioned, we're going through this rulemaking process. I mentioned technical assistance, not specifically part of the rule, but part of the overall new opportunities under the Clean Water Act that came with Bill. We're able to access 2% of each of those cap grants potentially for technical assistance. That can mean help with applications for funding. That can mean help with capacity development, financial capacity for small communities that might not be able to afford a loan, that they need to budget and do rate setting and all that good stuff. Help with meeting federal requirements like the Build America, Buy America, and others that are required by our program, and project management, ongoing assistance for communities. So we're excited about this. We're working on a request for proposals at this time. EPA also has funding for technical assistance, so we're coordinating with them on that. This is a significant opportunity. Emerging contaminants cap grant is at $1 million plus each year. And as I mentioned, we're determining needs and potential projects for that funding.
Commissioner Addington.
This is where I ask the questions that everybody already knows the answers to. But, will you just help me? So the 13 million there is what you're applying for from EPA?
We've applied for that.
That's existing.
Yeah, that's existing.
And that's okay, so then the 20 million?
That's additional supplemental money from the bipartisan infrastructure
So you're
laws.
applying for that.
We will be applying for it likely April.
And that number, is it just fixed by state or?
There's an allotment formula by EPA. And based on the appropriations that come out, they go through an allotment formula and calculate on a per state basis what this Clean Water State Revolving Fund gets, what the drinking water program gets, what the non-point source program gets.
Yeah. Okay, so then the 49% to do principal forgiveness, that's now moving forward.
That'll be after the rulemaking.
Yeah.
Where we have flexibility to increase our limits of principal forgiveness, which we'll talk about, and that we'll put into our intended use plan and apply for the bill money. So it's not current, but we're looking at doing that in the near future.
But you can't go backwards with that to existing loans.
We're thinking it'll be moving forward.
And Commissioner Addington, if I can add, the 49% is a total amount that we need to offer in terms of principal forgiveness as it relates to this $20 million. Because of the formula, we already know pretty precisely what we're going to be getting for the next 4 federal fiscal years as well, and they're all right around 20 million. It goes up to about 22 million in the 5th year. And then for this principal forgiveness, we are expected to increase the amount of principal forgiveness for what we use around the base cap grant, but we also do some sophisticated kind of financial modeling to ensure the perpetuity of the fund. Obviously, if we give away too much, then we're not going to have as much to revolve.
That was my next question.
Exactly. So on the cap grant, so the new stuff that's coming in through the increased investment over the next 5 years, that's fixed. 49% of that total needs to be given as principal forgiveness. In terms of existing kind of the base funds that we receive every year, which this year is 13 million, that's a little bit more variable. There is an expectation that we try to look at more principal forgiveness than we've been able to do in the past, but that's a little bit more of it's not static in the same way that the requirements to the new monies are.
And you just answered the question, but just so I'm clear, so you guys are thinking this is going to continue to be a fund that's sustainable?
Yes.
Because it's a great thing. And
Yes, that's a primary goal, and it's in rule.
Okay.
And we've been working at analysis on targeting, what we can provide for principal forgiveness to meet the bill. I should also just mention each cap grant, like the base cap grant, has a slightly different requirement for how much principal forgiveness we provide. And the bill specifically is the 49%. We can provide up to 40% of the base cap grant as a program. And we need to provide 49%, no more, no less, of the bill cap grant amount as principal forgiveness. So we're having to, do a lot of puzzle piece fitting and targeting, and it's been a team effort, I should say, and all hands on deck. So
thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. So yes, lots more funding, lots more principal forgiveness, and technical assistance in emerging contaminants. Next slide. Thanks. So to give a sense, Jennifer raised the point, and it's important that it's recognized this is over 5 years, the bill funding. The federal fiscal year 2022, as I mentioned, has been allocated to us that we need to apply for. The subsequent years are estimates at this time. So those numbers are 23 plus million, 25 plus million, then up to 27,872,179 for federal fiscal years 25 and 26. So when we look at the amount coming into the program over 5 years, it's 125,324,381 estimated, in addition to the base cap grant funding that we receive, and that bill supplemental, I should say the emerging contaminants supplemental, is at that $1 million estimate over the 5 years each year. Next slide. Thanks. So we're going to shift into the rulemaking focus. As you can appreciate, we've had a couple trajectories here where we've got the bill context that we were ramping up on to address these new provisions and priorities. And then we've got the rulemaking that's addressing this new requirement for principal forgiveness, as well as affordability criteria. We're also seeing this as an opportunity to revisit the criteria that we use to award principal forgiveness through affordability criteria to further incorporate environmental justice priorities. We're not required to do that, but we're being proactive to do that. And we're unique, actually, among states in doing this, that EPA acknowledges. Related to that, we're revisiting our project ranking and scoring to further incorporate some adjustments, not an overhaul, but adjustments to further address environmental justice, which we'll talk a little bit about. And then there's language in the rule that addresses our intended use plan specific to the project ranking and scoring that we're proposing changes, but leaving most of what is addressed related to the intended use plan in rule. Next slide. In terms of the milestones and timeline, where we've been and where we're at today. We've convened a rulemaking advisory committee, and we've conducted 3 meetings since July. Our first meeting, we provided an overview of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Program to educate the advisory committee members about how we work, the priorities that we're addressing programmatically, like the intended use plan, which is a document that's required by EPA, basically to identify applications that we receive throughout the year that we intend to fund for that year. We update the IUP 3 times a year, and there's public comment for transparency and input on that IUP. We're going to talk about how that relates to the rulemaking here. So we educated the RAC on the program. We introduced the priorities for the rulemaking, meeting 1, meeting 2. We got into the rules and focused on the language that we were proposing to adjust, and in some detail, moving into meeting number 3, where we presented our proposed recommendations, and that was well received. We got very positive feedback from the committee on the rule changes, as well as the overall process for the rulemaking. And we issued public notice on October 28th. We had a public hearing on November 15th. And here we are today at the Environmental Quality Commission meeting to talk about the proposed rule changes with a recommendation. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about each of those priorities that were mentioned before, the 4 main ones, and talk about the proposed rule changes at a fairly high level. The staff report has the detail on the changes, specifically with the language. I'm happy to answer any questions and address anything the commission wants me to address. So for principal forgiveness, overall, the proposed changes include language to allow flexibility to meet federal cap grant requirements, including but not limited to the bipartisan infrastructure law moving forward. In 2015, we had to go through a rulemaking because of the Water Resources Development Act, actually that related to principal forgiveness, where we're revisiting now. So we want to have flexibility and language in rule that specifically states we will meet federal capitalization requirements in the future. And again, this is a priority. We are proposing to eliminate the limits of principal forgiveness on a per loan basis so that we can meet that bill requirement overall for the program of 49%. Currently, the principal forgiveness limits are 50% or up to $500,000 per loan. We're looking to increase that to meet that requirement overall. We've been doing analysis. Post rulemaking, we'll be able to finalize that, and we'll be able to provide more principal forgiveness. When we revisited our rule, we acknowledged that there was a limitation on principal forgiveness for planning loans. Most planning loans are not eligible for principal forgiveness except for sustainable planning projects. We're proposing to make all planning loans eligible for principal forgiveness. And that's really important because communities often have challenges with funding, planning. They don't know where to start. So this is a real opportunity that we're adding into the rulemaking. And we're also eliminating the same limits for principal forgiveness for green projects, water efficiency, energy efficiency, green infrastructure, and environmental innovation. So that's consistent with the overall concept of removing limits for loans overall on a per loan basis. And as I mentioned, our intent with these priorities is to document the changes and the criteria and the limits in our intended use plan. And this is actually required by EPA. And so we're going to be meeting our federal requirement. And that's the goal. We've had this reviewed by DOJ, and they confirmed that these things don't need to be in rule. In fact, most SRFs across the country do not have these criteria in rule. They document them in the IUP, which is required, and EPA also supports this approach. And as I mentioned, the IUP includes public comment for transparency and responsiveness. It's updated 3 times a year. So there's still going to be, transparency about what we're doing and over time.
Vice Chair Barrasso.
If you eliminate principal forgiveness on a per loan basis, does that give the agency the flexibility on a per loan basis to go higher than 50% or 49%, as long as obviously the overall portfolio is lining up at that 49%.
Yes, exactly. That's the intent, really. And to be clear, we're proposing to eliminate the limits of principal forgiveness in rule. Not the overall principal forgiveness provision, but the details of that, the limits would go into the IUP. And yes, they would be more than the 50% or up to $500,000 while maintaining perpetuity of the fund.
Okay.
And this rulemaking would allow us the flexibility to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So yes, the IUP is key here. It includes the public comment for transparency and responsiveness. Next slide.
Stephanie, if you can get us the next slide, please.
Thank you. So the second priority is affordability criteria. We have language and rule that documents the details of our affordability criteria. I'm citing a quote from the bill implementation memo that states must include the disadvantaged community definition and the state affordability criteria, which applies to our program as far as the terminology. Drinking water uses disadvantaged communities. We use affordability criteria under the Clean Water Act. That needs to be documented in the IUP. So you can see there's the requirement in the guidance. And it mentions how the IUP provides an opportunity for meaningful public review and comment. So in terms of the affordability criteria, proposed changes, currently we use the Business Oregon Distressed Areas Index, which identifies distressed cities and counties. And we go to that list to say if that community is on the list, they are eligible for principal forgiveness under our affordability criteria. We're proposing to remove those details, and these changes will allow us to further incorporate environmental justice metrics into affordability criteria that we've been doing a lot of work and analysis on. That will allow us to further address economically disadvantaged, distressed, water pollution, and health burdened communities. And these are metrics and based on tools that EPA has provided as well as others to determine our metrics for environmental justice. We are proposing to include language from the Clean Water Act, Section 603I, regarding what is required for affordability criteria. So we will keep that in rule broadly as far as what needs to be included, which includes income, unemployment, population trends, and other data determined by the state, as well as economically distressed areas. So we're going to be consistent with what's required in the Clean Water Act in our affordability criteria. We will document that in the intended use plan, which again is required by EPA. And that is our summary on the affordability criteria proposed rule changes.
Is your hand up there, Vice Chair? Okay.
Thank you. The intended use plan, can you just describe what's the frequency with which that's generally updated, how that's updated, just to get a sense for that?
Yes, thank you for the question. We have an initial IUP issued for the state fiscal year, and that is updated a total of 3 times per year. It's based on the application review cycles that we have. We have deadlines for applications 3 times per year. So when we have applications received from that deadline, we go through an application review process. And then we determine eligibility, we score them, and those applications go on the intended use plan. And so based on the application cycles 3 times per year, each cycle, we get new applications, we add them to the IUP. Some of the applications projects get funded by our loans and they come off the IUP. So the IUP is a regularly updated document throughout the year 3 times based on the application review cycles. And each one has a public notice and comment period. Thank you. Next slide. Thank you. So for project ranking and scoring, similarly to the other priorities, the overall theme here is to remove detail from rule while keeping broad language about how we rank and score projects so that we can have more flexibility to make some adjustments specifically to incorporate environmental justice metrics into how we review projects. We're proposing to keep language and rule that highlights the primary categories that we evaluate projects under, which include water quality standards and public health considerations, watershed health benefits, and other considerations. We're proposing to remove the detail about how we score and rank under those categories, and noting that we have internal program procedures that actually have more detail in how we score projects under those categories. So we don't need the detail and rule. We have more detail in our procedures. And again, similar to the other priorities, we intend to document our project ranking and scoring in the IUP, which is required by EPA. Thank you. Next slide. And the fourth priority, language related to the intended use plan. There's language and rule that specifically identifies project ranking and scoring in the point system that's tied to the language in the intended use plan. And while we're removing detail from the section on project ranking and scoring, we intend to remove that similar detail related to the IUP language. We're intending to add language in the rule that clarifies we will document project ranking and scoring criteria in the IUP. So that's clear. And we intend to retain language regarding the intended use plan requirements overall. EPA has certain requirements of what needs to be in there and the timelines. And we do intend to continue publishing the IUP 3 times per year for that public comment and transparency, and to update the applications that come in throughout the year 3 times per year. And this will still allow us to meet EPA requirements for the intended use plan, and they need to accept our IUP each edition. Next slide. In terms of the stakeholder feedback and public comments, we've convened the rulemaking advisory committee, as I mentioned, for 3 meetings. As I mentioned, there was overall support for the proposed rule changes. The committee understood our approach, our strategy, our thinking, the context of the bipartisan infrastructure law, and gave us really good insights and feedback on the rules and the proposed changes and moving forward with bill. In terms of the feedback during those meetings, there were a couple themes that were addressed, and I wanted to bring attention to those with the commission. The committee members wanted to ensure that we are continuing to provide principal forgiveness particularly for the small disadvantaged communities. We heard that multiple times, and that's actually a priority for our program. And in fact, the proposed rules will enable the program to increase principal forgiveness for small disadvantaged communities that meet the affordability criteria as required by EPA. Also, there was discussion about incentives for green and sustainable projects, and we clarified that the proposed rules will actually enable the program to increase principal forgiveness by removing limits for green projects, as well as this provision to provide principal forgiveness for all planning loans, not just sustainable project planning, which I mentioned earlier. Those were 2 key things that were raised, and to be assured in terms of the rulemaking, those will be addressed and in fact enhanced with our adjustments to the program. In terms of the public comments during the public comment period, and this is all documented in the staff report, we received 3 public comments during the public comment period. 2 comments were not specifically related to this rulemaking. They were more comments and questions about the program, which were clarified in terms of how we operate and our focus. And then 1 comment was in the form of a letter that was written by the League of Oregon Cities, Special Districts Association of Oregon, and the Oregon Association of Clean Water Agencies jointly. And it was in support of the proposed rule changes. And that is documented as a public comment in the staff report. It was very positive, and it noted, specifically how the rule changes will enable us to further address needs of small communities and green projects for Oregonians. So we were very pleased to receive that from some key stakeholders in Oregon. And to summarize, the public comments were supportive or neutral. Next slide. So stepping back out in terms of the bill implementation context, to share where we're going. We are going to continue to convene the Standing Advisory Committee. When we appointed the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, we mentioned how we wanted to continue to engage with the stakeholder group on bill implementation beyond the rulemaking. So we want their input on these proposed changes as we move into the bill implementation on principal forgiveness, on the affordability criteria, which we've shared with them already, and project ranking and scoring, addressing environmental justice metrics into those elements of our program. In fact, we're trying to schedule a meeting in February so that we can have these things moving forward into our next step of developing that intended use plan targeted for March 2023. We're currently going through application review from applications received in December that will feed into that IUP. And we will use that IUP as a basis to apply for the bill supplemental cap grant. And hopefully, if they align, the base cap grant as well. The 2 cap grant applications we have to submit. We have to track that differently too. So
Director Feldman.
Thank you, Chair George. I just wanted to pause on this important point that Chris is making for a moment, because I'm really excited about this Standing Advisory Committee. I mean, when I look at this rulemaking overall, I kind of see the convergence of 3 things happening for this program. One is this a lot of money being infused over the next 5 years. 2, we're removing barriers in our rules to certain applicants and the amount of principal forgiveness. And 3, we're going to have this Standing Advisory Committee to work with us, through implementation to help inform on environmental justice communities' priorities and where the money is needed most. So the convergence of those 3 things is awesome for this program. So I just wanted to highlight that.
thank you so much, Leah. And yes, it is exciting, and we have a great stakeholder group, and that's going to expand. We have a lot of interest from stakeholders, the League of Cities, members of our committee. We intend to work with them in partnership on outreach even, to help identify opportunities for the program or innovation potentially of reaching applicants and borrowers we haven't reached before. So it is exciting, and there's a lot of opportunity out there that we're going to be following up on.
Commissioner Schlichten.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up on that. So when you are working with communities and engaging with communities, are you helping to identify needs and projects, or are the communities expected to identify those needs and then bring that information to the table?
It's both. We work with various aspects of our program and within DEQ. We have a broader water quality division, and we have other program areas. And one of our activities with Bill and the opportunities that are coming with is actually doing more outreach and education about the opportunities and how our program works, both internally and externally, so that when we have DEQ staff in the field, they can be aware of the CWSRF program and the opportunities for funding to address water pollution control and maybe even cleanup, which is eligible under our program. And so there's a lot of education that we're doing and we're going to do more of. And that'll also translate into educating potential applicants, doing outreach, possibly doing webinars and trainings, both externally and internally, about the bill funding, but overall for our program.
That's great. And Commissioner Schlichter, if I can add too, I think one of the things that is a real is a real challenge is ultimately those projects that a community wants to pursue has to be a local decision, right? And, you know, one of the big challenges, obviously, for a lot of communities is it's not just the building of a facility or the rehabilitation of a facility, but it's also something that they're going to be able to have the capacity to operate, maintain over time. And so that's just going to be a very specific community that needs to be a community-led decision that we don't want to get in the way of. But I think that's another space where the technical assistance
portion of this, we are going to be doing we're actually looking to contract that out and doing a request for
proposals. So we've got a third party who can operate in that kind of niche area and be able to work directly with communities to help support their planning and decision-making process. So I think we view ourselves as kind of the connectors and the marketers and the, you know, how do we kind of develop, you know, appropriate for DEQ's mission, wraparound services, but also then recognizing there are some ways in which we, especially with this new opportunities, some ways in which we can fund other types of supports for those communities to build a pipeline of projects that are appropriate for the communities themselves.
Yes, thanks, Jennifer. The technical assistance, yes, is key. Mentioned that earlier in the presentation, and having actually background in providing technical assistance for many years. Part of that does involve helping to identify needs, because a lot of times communities just don't know what they need and they don't know where to go. And that's where, you know, the technical assistance can come in to help them with that. And then, you know, education about our program and other programs and resources comes into play with our role as an agency and program. So thank you for the question.
Thank you.
In terms of those priorities, yes, the Standing Advisory Committee, really excited to continue engaging with them and to broaden our stakeholder interest and educate and outreach and provide the technical assistance on these opportunities. We're developing our intended use plan targeted by March, and then we're going to use that for the bill supplemental and the base cap grant applications targeted for April. And all of this would be post-rule making so that we can have those things in the IUP. So there's the timing issue there. And then we're coordinating with EPA on a regular basis regarding bill implementation and guidance to make sure we're meeting the requirements in our IUP for the cap grant and overall, because this is new for all of us. And we have a great partnership with EPA, Region 10 in particular, as well as their HQ. And I should say recently, they commended our program about what we're doing. We provide updates on the rulemaking, on the implementation. They highlighted the fact that, you know, we're one of the more proactive programs in the country. And, you know, they'd like to highlight that internally for their agency as well. So that was nice to hear just last week.
Good.
So a culmination of work over a year, bill implementation, rulemaking, and here we are today. And given all of this, we are pleased to recommend that the Environmental Quality Commission adopt the proposed rules as seen in attachment A of the staff report as part of chapter 340 of the Oregon Administrative Rules.
Thank you. Thank you for that very thorough presentation. Commissioners, before we entertain a motion, do you have other questions or comments about the presentation or any of the details that you're still curious about? All right, seeing none, I will entertain a motion on the recommendation.
I'll do it.
Go for it, Greg.
I never get to do one. I move that the Oregon Environmental Quality Commission adopt the proposed rules as seen in attachment A of the report for this item as part of chapter 340 of the Oregon Administrative Rules.
Do we have a second?
I would second it.
Motion's been made and seconded. Do we require further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, same sign. The abstentions, the motion carries. Thank you very much. This is really exciting work and exciting for the communities that are going to be getting the help that they really need. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And And congratulations to everyone on staying on schedule. Very nice.
Like 2 minutes.
Another
Nice work.
kudos to everyone present.
That clock says noon.
Yeah. that clock's
Oh,
so-
like,
It's also.
You're all
well,
good.
we don't look at clocks.
Yeah, it
We
hasn't
don't,
moved in a
work
while,
with
so don't
us,
look at that
so, but we can get in some commissioner reports. So commissioners, what do you have to report? I waited until Commissioner Slusher has taken a bite for breakfast. Kyle.
I can start. I actually don't have a whole lot to report. As people know, you and I have both been quite busy with the director search, so that has been taking up a lot of time. But I do also still serve as the liaison with the internal audit committee and things like that. So the brief update there is we were unable to find somebody on our last search, so that is a bummer. There was some good candidates there. That position description will be going back out in the next couple months, so the search is ongoing. In the meantime, Brian Bowling is developing a contract with Portland State University to get some of the critical work done on a contract basis. So some of the work will be going forward just in that avenue while an internal auditor gets put into place. So not the best news, but not the worst news.
Thank you. Yeah, hopefully the new year will be a better time. Sometimes in the new year, people are more focused on their employment or their work situation than during the holidays and all that. All right, anybody else? Commissioner Slusher.
Thank you. I don't have an update that is directly related to DEQ work, but I did want to just share with the commission that the Oregon Climate Change Research Institute, which is out of Oregon State University, just released their 6th Oregon Climate Assessment 2 weeks ago. And this is a biennial report that presents the current state of the science around the impacts of climate change in Oregon and projected future impacts. And it's more of the same information that we've received for years, but it's very clear that Oregon is already experiencing climate impacts that are affecting our natural environment. We're seeing reduced snowpack, we're seeing increased severity of droughts and wildfires. We've seen a tremendous amount of glacial decline, which has a real impact on water levels, irrigation water supplies in parts of the state. And of course impacts aquatic species that are reliant on those water supplies. So I just wanted to share that and make sure that everyone's aware that there's this report out that presents a really great update on the available science, and that it looks at different emission scenarios moving forward to project future impacts. And on the current trajectory that we're on, things aren't looking so good. But if we're able to make the emissions reductions that are called for under some of DEQ's programs, like the Climate Protection Program, we might, and of course, other states and national governments to take similar actions, we might be able to prevent some of the more severe impacts moving forward.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that report got some news coverage locally as well, so, or at least, statewide. Commissioner Pep?
I just kind of add to that as well, because I was at a recent meeting with one of the international people that are putting together the projections of that. Everything Amy says is true, but for the first time, they're willing to say, because they always give the worst case, medium case, best case scenario for projections, that based on the regulatory policy, largely with the introduction of renewable fuels into the energy sector, we're actually, if those all go according to plan, we're on the best case scenario for projections. So we have, in theory, at least at this point, bent the curve.
That is exciting. That is exciting. And goodness knows that this department has been busy at work with some of that work. So thank you. Thank you.
Okay, just on this topic, if I may, I was reading a piece recently that kind of put it into perspective for me that, if you're feeling like, yeah, we've kind of tipped over or there's been a shift, experts are saying there has been. And so, and why is that? Well, it's a convergence of dollars, a lot of dollars being invested right now that we're seeing, through IRA and BIL. There's the technology advances that are actually making it possible to make these renewable fuels, to, bring cleaner electricity, and the idea that it's going to fit into an economic and market system. And so when you have those things going on, they're saying, okay, if you feel like the pieces are in place, they kind of are. And what's left to do now is build it. How do we build it in this country and make it more part of the natural infrastructure of the country's, economics and systems and hardscape. So I just read that recently and thought it really does kind of put it all together with a lot of the policy work that you all have been working on and things that you see from other agencies and nationally. So just wanted to add that to that conversation piece.
Thank you. Others?
I think the only update that I have, Chair George, is that the city of Portland in December, and this was only in conversation with DEQ staff that this came to light, but passed a policy phasing out diesel, petroleum-based diesel by 2030, and it's just another piece that I know, given that we passed our expanded clean fuels policy, it'll just further support that work, and I think it lines up with a lot of these conversations. And so City of Portland pushing towards renewable diesel. And so that'll just be another tool pushing towards that. And in some ways, I suspect making our implementation of our clean fuels policy easy.
Thank you. Commissioner Addington?
I was afraid of my column. I don't have anything.
That's all right.
I will just say that, I'm making a transition still into a new job. And so that's been full and busy, and a relocation in the future. One of the things I love about this work is, I get to go, Farm Bureau has chapters all over the state. And so I'm going to spend the next few weeks, all corners of the state, which I think some people shudder at that kind of travel, but I really love it. I mean, it's great. So it's great to get out and interact with people and hear what's on their mind and what their real world problems are. And so anyway, that's what I'm doing.
All right. That does sound like a fantastic trip. So for me, I have to agree with Commissioner Kyle. The director of recruitment work, as we knew it would, it keeps us very busy. There are generally multiple meetings a week, some more than others. But lately it's usually been multiple meetings a week, but good and important work. And we will be discussing some of the results of that later today. So that has kept us very busy. I sat in, as I said I might, on an idea that a petition that came before the EQC decided they were not able to adopt it, but I thought it was an interesting conversation. And so I sat in on some follow-up with Jennifer Weigel and some of our staff. That was the trash TMDL position that came from Willamette Riverkeepers. And, we've seen a few different, citizen petitions come before the EQC, and whether or not the EQC can adopt, the rules presented, they often bring important issues and important problems to the table and provide us an opportunity to do further work and conversation with that. And this is another one that I think falls into that category. Of course, the riverkeeper groups, a lot of people are familiar with them, and certainly Willamette Riverkeeper has got a long history in the Willamette Basin and does a lot of community-based work. And they try to work, with local government, with local private industry, with local parks, with local communities, all sorts of folks up and down the Willamette. And as they shared with us, and they do these riverside cleanups, right? They do them annually. In some places they do them monthly, they do them quarterly. And he said, they of course had the numbers of tons of trash that they remove from our rivers and the sides of our rivers every year. And they said, you come back next quarter and it's all there. Yeah. And I completely, understand that the EQC, we don't have a water quality standard for trash. So we can't quite have a TMDL for trash. But I do have to credit them for saying the result, the solution to this, whatever it is not just one municipality's or one county's or one private landowner's solution. And it's very closely related with some social problems and social problems associated with houselessness that we have. And these things in some cases, not always, but in some cases go together. And that it is, if we're going to make some systematic change, it is going to have to be at a higher level. One that, again, local people, private entities can all come to in their own way, but it's going to have to be a more systemic approach. And they said, and also it's really hard to keep your volunteers motivated when they come back and, there's just as much to clean up the next quarter. So I just wanted to mention it. I think it's a compelling challenge they brought to us. I don't think DEQ isn't the sole answer to the question, but I do think it's one that anybody who cares about our waters cares about. And I think it's a conversation we need to keep going and we need to bring to other tables. So I just wanted to mention that. I did mention briefly that I was able to attend that Clean Water Act 50th anniversary event that the Environmental Law Center hosted. Have to say, I haven't been to one of those conferences probably in about 15 or more years. But it was kind of enjoyable that way. It was kind of like a reunion, right? So we had Dana Polsky down from Region 10, Director of the Office of Water, Mary Lee Socia, who a lot of people in Oregon know, who will be retiring soon from EPA's office in Oregon, and of course our own Jennifer Weigel. Some really interesting conversation. And as somebody, it was a little nervous making because I said, I started my thoughts with, I haven't done this work other than what comes before the EQC in about 15 years, folks. So if I'm a little rusty, cut me some slack. But one of the things that was striking to me is for as much good work as the Clean Water Act has done, and as much that problems that it hasn't been able to solve, it was really fascinating to me to see how much the conversation has changed, in the last 15 to 20 years. We are categorically not where we were 15 or 20 years ago. Not at DEQ, not at EPA, not to the local people or the representatives of industry and permit holders. The conversation has really advanced, and it is a much more open conversation. It is a conversation that has a lot more tolerance to different people coming at it from different directions. And to me, that was very encouraging. So I wanted to mention that. And then on the very small scale, just as one person who sits on the board of a business that I have to look after, DEQ has been doing a lot of work on, recycling renovation across the state, but also waste reduction and integrating these efforts more. And I happen to be one of the people who's responsible for running a tourist destination, a large casino and hotel that thousands of people go through every day, let alone every week or month. And anyone who runs a restaurant will tell you, let alone 5 or 7 in the same building, food waste, it's disturbing at times how much food waste there is in the restaurant business. So one of the things that serving on that board, we just said, what can we do about this? Come on, folks. And so while there's a lot of things that can be done, we're excited to say that in the new year, before long, we anticipate almost 100% of our food waste to be put to productive use. One, there's a local tribal member who's a hog farmer and gets a lot of it every month. Good for her, more power to her. And then there's a local commercial scale composting facility. I don't know anything about this. Soldier larvae of some sort that eat all the food and make productive compost out of it. I don't know, just outside of McMinnville. And they just said, whatever's left, we'll take. We will drive trucks up, and whatever Madam Hog Farmer does not want, I want it all. So I feel much better about that than I did a couple months ago. I was like, hey, we got almost all our food waste going to some sort of productive use. So I think we're all trying to do these things here and there, and the more we can work, whether it's at local scale or large scale, hopefully we're moving in the right direction. So just a couple tidbits I wanted to share.
Chair George, if I could just pick up on a couple things that you mentioned. One briefly, and just I'm so glad you had the opportunity to attend that conference, and kudos to Holly Duncan with the Environmental Law and Education Center for continuing these conversations. She's got, she calls them conversations, and she's just got a real knack, I think, for as you say, like moving it forward and modernizing the conversations
right.
and keeping them real. So
Right.
that's great. And just to the trash team deal discussion too, I thought I would just pick up on that a little bit. I've talked to, I think, each of you a little bit in detail about the governor's office structure and kind of how she is, structuring her office and her folks. And she has within that structure, an initiatives office, and that includes her 3 primary initiatives that you've all heard: housing, homelessness, behavioral health, and education. So to kind of tie this together, DEQ doesn't have primacy, if you will, on those issues. But given those issues are going to be a focus for the governor, certainly she's going to be looking to her public administration, part of her arm of her office to say, where are there some pieces that you play in these arenas, and how do we take a holistic approach? And we've heard that from her. So, we'll be looking for those opportunities. Where do we add to that conversation, and where can we help? And obviously really the frustrating scene of the trash over and over again is important, is part of the conversation. And I think on the housing front, our on-site septic program is a really important piece of that. And so we're helping to bring kind of that conversation together. How do we make sure that, people have affordable systems and can keep those on-site septic systems running in all the different parts of our state?
Yeah, that's really important. Thank
Yeah.
you. All right. Unless we have any other comments or questions on that, we are just about spot on time to break for lunch.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Stephanie. And so everyone, if you can rejoin us this afternoon, we will see you at 1:15.
And thank you all. The commission will now recess for a working lunch and executive session. The recording will be stopped. All people are asked to log off from the Zoom for this session unless they are a representative of the media who has previously requested access. Thank you very much.